Hey guys, it's Tygy, and in this video I'm going to be showing you some common mistakes that I have seen in Theme Park Tycoon 2, and I'm also going to be showing you how to fix these if you do any of them. These are split up into three categories. The red category is ones that you should pretty much never do. There's almost no situations that they actually help you in. The orange ones you're only going to use for very specific detailing, and the yellow ones are only usually an issue to other players. So I'm going to be starting out with these red ones over here. These first two look pretty similar. I have my draw distances way down because of lag issues, but you can see I've got two teacups rides here, and they're outlined in these red paths. But let's go over to this first one. You can see it's got the teacups cart, and at the very entrance, there's no queue path. It is just the entrance connected to a normal path. And the reason you should avoid this is, for example, if I open the ride, guests will be walking along. They'll be like, ooh, teacups. They'll go, they'll get in the ride, and the ride will begin running. Now, for the entire length of the ride, which this one's pretty long, it is an entire 91 seconds. So for 91 seconds, guests will come by this ride and they'll be like, oh, well, it's going. I can't go on it because there is no queue for them to wait in. This one little entrance piece does not count as a queue. You need a queue path for guests to wait in order for them to queue up for the ride. So this will only allow guests in when the ride is not running. I hope that made sense because that was very difficult for me to explain somehow. Anyway, if you want to fix this, it's very simple. All you have to do is just remove the normal path in front of the entrance and replace it with a bit of a queue path. It can be any length. Just make sure you have some kind of a queue path so that guests can actually wait for your ride. Ideally, you have it at a decent length so that it won't fill up, because then that'll still have the same issue of guests not being able to join the queue for the ride, but you will still have guests constantly going on the ride, so it's not quite as bad. This next one is kind of similar, but it's still a little different. Instead of having normal paths here, we have queue paths. And the problem with this one is the guests go on the ride, that's all fine, they can queue up for the ride and everything. They go on the ride, when they get off the ride, they're stuck on this path. They're too polite to hop over the fence, they're too polite to walk on the grass, so they just stay here on this one little square, stuck forever. This can be helpful if you're trying to get the jailed achievement, but that'll typically decrease your park rating and make you earn less money, which is most of the time not something that people want to do. So obviously, to fix this, all you need to do is just remove this path, build an extra path, and just connect up this path to a main path. Make sure all your paths can lead to the exit. Make sure the queue doesn't block the exit of a ride. This next one over here has to do with coasters. It is leaving the chain lift on for your entire track. As you can see, this entire track has the chain lift on it, even when it doesn't need to pull the ride up a hill. Now you might just think, oh, that's annoying to only players that have their volume on, because the chain lift, when you're going over it, I don't have my volume on and I can't record my volume anyway, so you can't hear it, but it makes this horrible noise when you're going fast over it, which is perfectly fine when you're going up hills slowly at the chain lift speed. When you're going down quickly, it sounds terrible. However, chain lift pieces also cost more than regular pieces, so if you build like this, you're losing money, and if you build like this, you're wasting money that you could be spending on making a longer roller coaster or making other rides. There's pretty much no scenarios where you should do this. Obviously, you can have chain lifts on some flat sections if you need the ride to be pulled along a flat section, but most of the time, if it's got enough speed, just make sure you keep the chain lift off. It'll save some people's ears and it'll save you a bit of money. Now that we're past these three that you should never do, I'm just going to move on to these orange ones, but first I'm going to say that if you enjoyed this video, check out my other videos, subscribe. Anyway, here we are and at this first one, and you can see that I've built two identical coasters, one using the steel coaster and one using the multi-launch. These two rides are exactly the same, aside from being a mirror image of each other, but you should probably, if you're going to build a ride like this, you should stick to the steel coaster. The issue here is that you're not using the right coaster for the job if you use a multi-launch. The special feature of the multi-launch coaster is being able to use boosters, but since this ride does not use boosters, you do not need to use the multi-launch coaster, and since the multi-launch is more expensive, you would be saving money by using a steel coaster. This applies to any other ride type too. For example, if you built a steel coaster that doesn't have a slope greater than a gentle slope, you might want to replace that with the cheaper junior coaster. If you build a vertical launch coaster but you only use boosters on flat sections, you might want to replace that with the cheaper multi-launch. And the same applies to most of the other rides that have special features. Now, I know it's getting dark in the game, but I'm just going to finish up this point real quick. The one time you would want to use a multi-launch coaster instead of the steel coaster is, for example, if you like the design of the track better. This one has this triangle frame track, and then this one has this more flat-looking track. Uh, Obviously, if you want to make a detailed park and you prefer the look of this track, you could obviously use a multi-launch, even if you don't use a multi-launch. Usually when you're building a normal park, it's better to use the cheapest roller coaster that has all the pieces you need. Now I'm going to wait until day before I get on to my next point over here. Now that it is daytime once again, I can cover this next common mistake, which is to make a transport ride with only one station. Obviously this monorail is a little short, but I had to make it kind of small just to show my point. This monorail only has one station, so it loops around just like a normal track ride, which, could be fine in a park that you're trying to add detail by making, for example, a monorail ride that you go on to ride it as like a scenic kind of tour or something. But typically in the game, the guests use these transport rides as a way to get from one section of your park to another, and they can't do that if there's only one station. I see this one a lot because people often don't realize that you can put multiple stations on these rides, and guests will get off at these different stations, and they can use it to move around the park. Obviously, the way you fix this is just by making the monorail start at one section of the park, then coming around to a different section, pretend that this is really far away, and then instead of having just flat track here, you replace it with a station, add an entrance and exit, connect it up to a path, and then you bring it back. However, you do want to make sure that every section in your park does have a path access to it, because the guests may try to avoid this monorail if they don't want to spend money, and they will find themselves stuck and have a really difficult time getting back to the park entrance to leave. So make sure that you always have a path connected from every section of your park so that guests can always get out, similar to the second tip over here. Now we are moving on to these final three. These ones don't affect like your park money making or rating it or in any way as far as I know, but most people when they see these they're not going to be too interested in them. Starting with this one, vintage cars or really any other track ride straight up to the sky limit and back down. Not only is this boring, it for vintage cars especially, it only minimally increases the ride's speed. It's going to go up at a slow speed and it's going to come down at a slow speed. It's not going to add any excitement to the ride aside from maybe the excitement of being high up. But these rides, the vintage cars specifically, is intended to be more of something that goes on the ground around some scenery. If you want a tour ride that goes up high, you might want to look for the observation tower or maybe a monorail, but most certainly not a vintage cars. I haven't seen these too often recently, but I used to see these all the time, and they really annoyed me because it just seems so unnecessary and pointless. This one over here, I'm going to have to put it into testing mode to show you. This one is kind of a combination of two. The first one is having unnecessarily short coasters, for example, with just a single hill, like this one over in the corner, although in some scenarios you might want a short coaster if you don't have enough money, but it's kind of in the same vein as this one, putting it just up to the sky limit. It's kind of boring and it doesn't make for a very interesting ride, especially for like real players to go on. But the main issue with this one, which you will see if I put it into testing, is that, well, it goes over here, it launches up at kind of a high speed. I put up the boost speed, but then it comes flying into the station and it just stops. I'm going to play this again in first person mode so you can maybe see just how painful this looks. It's almost like slamming straight into a brick wall. When you come to the station, you're going to be forced to stop. Like, you have to stop at every station, unless you have certain settings activated, but that's beside the point. Make sure that you have brakes before the station, or at least something, some track to burn off the speed. Otherwise, it's going to look pretty painful to anyone who goes on this ride. The way to fix it, as I said before, would be to add some brakes before the end, which will slow you down at a little bit of a slower speed so it doesn't slam you straight into the station, or just have enough track that it'll burn off most of the speed from friction as you go through the layout. And here we are coming to the last one. This one really only matters if you're trying to make realistic roller coasters. If you're trying to make a silly roller coaster or just making an experiment to see how crazy you can make a ride, obviously ignore this and do whatever you want, because this tip is just all about realistic banking. For this roller coaster, as you can see, it comes up here. These tracks are banked slightly on a flat piece with no turn, which doesn't really make sense. And if that was in real life, it would be uncomfortable. You're sliding to the side of your seat. Just pretty weird overall. This next part, you go down here. This turn has no banking. It's really difficult and requires some practice to get banking on turns like perfectly right. And most of the time, if you don't put banking on a turn, it's not going to be the end of the world. But of course, if you do want to try to make a realistic park, try to practice getting your turns banked, because that makes them feel more smooth. Not having banked turns makes it kind of feel like you're going to get flung out of your seat. If you've ever been on a wild mouse coaster in real life, the turns on the top are unbanked, and you know what those feel like. Not exactly the most comfortable, but that's kind of the point of that ride. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. The next bad part of this ride is this. It goes up, and then it decides, you know what, I'm going to hang upside down for a while. And, if you're trying to make a coaster that is upside down, this is perfectly fine. But in most scenarios, most roller coasters in real life, go upside down and then quickly go back. They, in most situations, wouldn't have a huge drop that is completely upside down, because that would make it feel like you're going to fall vertically out of your seat, even if it is completely safe. And then I just flung around the banking here, made it look kind of messed up. I'm going to do a ride view of this just so you can see how weird this looks. Alright, so that was the ride. As you could probably see, it looked pretty weird. I'm too lazy to wait for it to be daytime again, so I'm just going to place some lights around me to make some artificial sunlight. Now that's a little bit better. If you do want to fix this issue of difficult banking, just try to remember to only bank on turns. Keep the roller coaster facing straight forward without any banking most of the time. It's kind of hard to explain what specifically to do. It just takes practice and paying attention to real life rides. But anyway, that's all I have to say for this video. Aside from I had tried to record a video like this a long time ago, but the audio didn't record for that video, so I sure hope it did for this one. Anyway, if you enjoyed it, you can check out some of my other videos or subscribe. Or if you want, you could join my Discord server. The link to that is in the description. And I could make a sequel video to this. If you guys come up with more common mistakes that you guys see a lot and put them in the comments, I might make a follow-up video with some more of those mistakes in them and teach you guys how to fix those. Anyway, since that is all I have for this video, I already said everything I needed to say, so I am going to say goodbye.